All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation about how Linaro and Schneider Electric are working together on open source software. My name is Ralph Seamson. I'm a senior software developer working for Linaro. I'm based in Ottawa, Canada. And my co-host today.
And I am Pascal Eberhardt. I am an embedded software engineer working for Schneider Electric, and I am located at Grenoble in France. It's a real pleasure to do this presentation with you, Ralph.
Likewise. Thank you for joining me. So today we're going to talk about long-term support, or LTS as everybody likes to call it. We're going to talk about it from the perspective of both a vendor, Linaro, and a client, Schneider Electric, which provides a bit of interesting perspective on how things work. The goal of long-term support, of course, is to provide stable software over a long term. And the main way that we achieve this is to limit the amount of new features and changes that go in. That's how we achieve stability. And at the same time, we want security fixes. We want to fix bugs that customers find annoying to improve our product. And so when we're doing LTS work, there's a fine balancing act to try and figure out what does and doesn't get included. And it is very much a custom solution in each situation where every customer has different criteria on what they do or don't want. Even from one product to another, you can have significant variation. Why would we want to do all of this work? Well, the answer used to just be, it's a good idea to have a nice stable product for your customers, make good software. But increasingly, we now have regulations like the EU CRA Act, where companies are being forced to provide software updates. So it's become more of a question of you must do this, it's not so much you should anymore. So what we wanted to talk about today was what happens after you do this for a number of years, and how do things evolve over time. Speaking very generally, we see three trajectories in this kind of work. The least common is doing no LTS maintenance at all. It can happen for a variety of reasons, like if the company goes bankrupt or the product gets canceled. Sometimes management doesn't want to invest in doing LTS work. That's sort of the easiest one, but the downside, of course, is that your customers are not getting fixes for their software. They may be unhappy. And given the rise of the legislation that's coming out, you may have a possibility of fines or fees that you're subjected to. So increasingly, this is just not an option at all. Much more common trajectory that we see is companies outsourcing their long-term support to a third party like Linaro. This is very common and really quite a good way to go, especially if your company does not have the expertise or the time or the people to do the maintenance work. You maybe want to focus on your business value. And the really only downside to this approach would be that there's a tendency to drag your feet in deploying updates. Companies usually have their own agendas, and they're very good at coming up with reasons why you might want to postpone upgrading something. And when you put a third party doing the work involved, it just compounds things. So you kind of lose a little bit of the control in this process, but it is still a good way to go. The third option, of course, is to embrace the open source code and try and leverage it to your advantage by becoming more active and participating in the development and really treating it almost like code that you own as part of your development. In these situations, the companies tend to start getting involved in the open source projects. They start contributing bug fixes, sometimes features, helping to highlight pain points and setting direction. So it's beneficial for everyone involved. And we now want to switch to talking specifically, turning it into a case study between the work done by Linaro and Schneider Electric. I think everybody in the room knows who Linaro is, so we don't need much of an introduction there, but I'm going to turn it over to Pascal to give you some background on who is Schneider Electric.
Okay, so Schneider Electric is a technology leader in the electrification and automation to industries, buildings, homes, infrastructures, and data centers. Schneider's solutions are an aggregation of multiple components such as hardware, IoT devices, software, services. We are here today to talk about IoT devices. An embedded device requires a secure execution environment to run, and when there is a microprocessors, it usually means Linux. I am part of the platforming team responsible of providing the embedded Linux distribution for embedded devices within Schneider Electric. So Schneider Electric started using Linux a while ago, and at the beginning, the board support package of processor vendors were used and heavily modified. As well, I don't know if you know, the Pocky distribution was used to make the images. I don't know in the room if how many people already used or used Yocto at some stage. Yes, a few of them. Is it a good practice to use Yocto distro as an image for production? Anyone? Yes. Okay, indeed, it is not a good idea, and it has been fixed, of course, since then. So those BSP were heavily modified, and it was not expected to have major upgrade at this stage. A few years later, a product has new requirements such as communication requirements, cyber security requirements, and all those new features have strong requirements against the board support package, and upgrade was needed at this time. Schneider Electric needed some help, and Linaro and Schneider Electric started working together in 2019 with Linaro as a key driver. Linaro made the migration of this old and heavily patched BSP into a more recent and coherent LTS release.
So we thought we would do a little graphical diagram here to illustrate the roles a little bit. There's a color code at play. The purple is Linaro and the green is Schneider Electric. Those happen to be the colors of these companies. You can see that most of the work here is being now done by Linaro. This includes running nightly CI builds, running automated regression tests in Lava Lab in Cambridge. We, of course, did CVE monitoring, looking for vulnerabilities, backporting fixes where needed, keeping up to date with the LTS releases upstream. As Pascal mentioned, there was a large component to just bring them up to date, from 2 or 3 year old versions of everything to stable versions. And we did also do the formal releases that were then used by the different client groups within Schneider Electric. So we would do 4 releases per year officially on 2 hardware platforms, one from Renaissance and one from Altera. And there were also 2 kernel versions involved at the time. Looking back, this was fairly simple starting point. It gets more complicated as time goes on. So a few years later, and many releases later, we have Schneider developing their Linux skills, and the Linaro team continuing to do release work, CV monitoring as described. But this began to evolve, and so we're now 3 years later after the start of our contract, and you can see that the green has increased. Schneider is now they've moved the source code into their own code repositories. They're doing automated builds on their own infrastructure. They are tracking upstream LTS for kernel and Yocto and managing those migrations within the team within Schneider, and doing their own release management. And they've also added additional hardware platforms. And that reminds me to mention that that was one of the main reasons why they wanted to add more platforms to the existing two. And at that point, they could have chosen to engage with a larger, buy more Linaro contract to support those extra platforms. Or, as the case was, they decided to invest in their team internally to build up their expertise. So what is Linaro doing now that Schneider is taking over some of these jobs? Well, I'll talk about it more in detail in a few slides, but there are plenty of bugs and other interesting, weird things that exist in all these SOCs, and we started looking and focusing on those. And that brings us to the present day, which Pascal will talk about.
So nowadays, Schneider Electric platforms continue to expand and mature. The goal of the team is to implement new features, add new processors, as well as working on reducing the cost of the maintenance of the BSP, and by working especially on the design. And the second part is working on reducing the technical debts by working as close as possible to upstream. So the last piece which was missing then was the automated regression testing. So we dropped our in-house basic way of testing, and we created a new board farm. And it took us a few years to have the proper regression scope for the board farm and to set it in place. And now it is mature and working. Of course, this board farm is based on Lava and Squad open source software. I expect that most of the people in this room knows that, but Lava and Squad are made by Linaro. Lava automates tests on boards. It controls the power, flash the boards, boot, reboot the boards, deploy the tests, execute them, and collect the results. Squad aggregates all those results into a coherent quality dashboard, which is readable by a human being. So Linaro provides Squad and Lava, as well as expertise. After 6 years, to summarize, Schneider Electric internal LTS follow LTS release of Linux, follow LTS release of Yocto. We have nightly builds generating all the variants we are supporting, and we have nightly tests verifying those images. And we are still working with Linaro and we need his expertise for specific points that Ralph is going to talk about.
And they've continued to add even more platforms to their support. So they're up to about 10 board types now, which is quite a lot. So from Linaro's point of view, the contract and the work has changed over the last 6 years. We started with the more traditional LTS work of doing release management and doing CV assessments and fixes and that sort of stuff for the client. And as Schneider developed their comfort level with Linux increased, and they took on these roles, Linaro started to transition more to doing development work and debugging work. And typically, the harder bits, the tricky bits where they either there was no time to investigate some of these issues on the Schneider side, or you needed resources beyond what they had, and Linaro was a great pool of resources to help with these weird issues. So I don't want to bore you with a really long list of all the details, but just to give you some ideas, we've worked on adding some new features, such as using a TPM to store keys for device attestation. It's new to the product line, and how did we incorporate that into the Schneider Yocto build and hardware decisions. So there was a whole bunch of architectural and then implementing. We've looked at some software bugs, like a race condition, a data race in a device driver for a crypto accelerator that showed up when we wanted to deploy DM Verity. The board would crash basically during boot, and so we spent a long time digging very deep in the kernel. I say we, but it was mostly me. This was one of many different things I've investigated. And we were able to find it and fix it. We've also found the occasional hardware problem. There was an issue with a UART on one of the platforms that turned out to be a hardware issue in the SoC. As you all probably know, the SoCs today are so complex. They all contain bugs. So eventually, when you trip over one of them, you have to find a workaround. And that, again, takes a lot of time working with the vendor in some cases, and then implementing the workaround and testing that it really works. That all takes time. And Pascal mentioned the automated tests that are running every night. So there are occasionally regressions found, or tests just don't work correctly anymore on a new platform, or something changes in the kernel that requires the test to be amended. So spending time to help triage the test results is another area we've helped out. But if I summarized it, we started doing most of the LTS maintenance work, and then we've sort of transitioned into me becoming essentially one of their members of their development team, focusing on sort of the tricky and exotic stuff. And I'll transition to Pascal here to talk about Schneider's side again.
Yep. So Schneider Electric has a robust history in hardware, and it is a software company too. Working with open source is an iterative process where a company tries to reduce its maintenance costs and anticipate new trends. The Schneider Electric is consuming open source for a while, and it is now starting to contribute as well. A key achievement this year is that Schneider Electric is now a member of Yocto Project. Yocto membership is a sign of Schneider Electric understanding the value of open source. Other contributions are upstream efforts, which are ongoing internally, and as well with Linaro and others. And to help this effort, we are as well building now our main branch on top of master branch of Open Embedded and Yocto. There is still a lot to do, especially we need to improve our involvement with the community. Now, from a technical point, we have a goal of having one unique source code for the BSP. What it means is all the products are using the same branch for the repository for one LTS. So we are supporting 10 processors today on 3 Linux LTS. Those kernels are vanilla kernels, on top of which we have only added the driver we required for the supported processors and boards. They are aggregated together into one branch, as we said before, and those patches are usually cherry-picked from processor vendors, such as Texas Instruments or NXP. We are supporting as well 2 LTS releases, Kirstone and ScarGap from Yocto, and the main branch we just discussed before. So working this way take a little bit of more work, but there is only one branch to maintain whatever the number of products and the number of firmware image we are generating. Hence, it is scalable. Now we have a LTS version, and products are using it, and of course, they need new features and new processors to be supported in this LTS. And with a dozen of processors, a few kernel versions, a few Yocto versions, we have plenty of good reason to get something wrong. In this case, automatic regression testing is key to maintain a certain level of quality, and it to handle the variety of possible combination of hardware and software version. So today we are running about 4,000 tests every night on about 40 devices on those 10 processors. So we were speaking about this instrument and NXP, and there are others such as Renesas, for example. So the board farm is now mature, and we are in a process of continuously integrating new boards and new processors, as well as tests. Back to you, Ralph.
Thank you. All right, sort of to wrap things up, we wanted to just share a few thoughts on what we've learned together, working together on the open source in the past 6 years. These are all things that may seem very obvious in hindsight, but as a company comes on board and joins the open source project, you know, these are things you rediscover each time, and we thought it's worth mentioning some of these explicitly. The first one being that, you know, having source code shared and accessible is obviously an important part of open source, but it's really the tip of the iceberg when it comes to working open and collaboratively with other people and benefiting from work that the community has done. There are many more aspects beyond just the source code that you need to learn and become familiar with to get good benefit out of open source. And that leads into my second point, which is that actively participating in the open source projects helps you to understand the project, helps you to know what's coming down the pipe, how it might influence your product. It gives you the opportunity, and I say you as the customer here, to influence what happens with the open source. You may be able to point out, you know, oh, this new direction that you're going in has the following shortcomings and doesn't work in this scenario. And the open source guys, you know, they don't have the benefit of working on 100 different environments, so getting feedback from users is important, and they appreciate it. Sometimes you can help set a project, you know, expand the scope of a project. Sometimes it just comes down to providing simple bug fixes. All of these are good things. The more we join our efforts to put our effort into, you know, one code base globally, then we're all going to benefit from that by not having to re-implement it over and over again. Upstreaming, getting your code upstream, minimizing the amount of changes that you locally have compared to upstream, and trying to align yourself to what upstream is doing. It can be difficult in a large company that's not used to that sort of a model, but there's a benefit to really doing it because it reduces your own costs and friction in using open source and leveraging it. And naturally, automation is a huge factor to dealing with scaling to lots of different boards, lots of different software versions. If you don't automate, then you can't have any sort of confidence that what you're shipping is actually going to work. So you need to automate your builds, your tests as much as you can. Again, none of this is really novel or new, but it's things we discover. It's been neat to watch Schneider sort of climb up and become really understand this both from the engineering level and then the management level, starting to see the benefits and coming on board with it. So from the Linaro side, we've been really, it's been and it continues to be a great pleasure to work with the Schneider team on this. We've had lots of interesting bugs to look at, lots of good technical discussions. So I'm enjoying this work. I'd like to thank Pascal for agreeing or volunteering to co-present with me. And we're basically wrapping here.
Thank you, Ralph, as well.
Okay. And thank you all for coming, and we'll take questions. If anyone has questions? Yeah, okay.
As engineers and technologists, I think we all agree with the points on you've made. I think one of the things that I've personally run into as a challenge at two companies is basically that ROI and putting numbers to it when you're talking to management, right? They want hard numbers, and I don't know how you guys have any good stories or reference points in terms of, or case studies that the rest of us can leverage to kind of help make that point.
I think it's an excellent question. Both of us are sort of at the engineering level, so I don't know if I have any hard data, but I think we probably have some folks that we could talk to that might discuss, how internally within a large company do you demonstrate this?
Yeah, and it basically takes time.
It takes time.
I think it's between, we're talking about 10 years from using Linux, be able to say that you are using Linux, the same for Yocto, understand the value of open source, and then understanding the concept of contribution and its value. It is a slow process, it is iterative, it takes time, and I don't think there is I have no knowledge of any shortcut possible. Yeah.
I guess the one thing that has helped within Schneider, the team that I'm working with, is essentially an internal reference design. And having that group within Schneider as a contact for the other teams that are using Linux, it gives them someone they can call to and say, hey, we need some help with this. And when they gain the confidence that, hey, there is someone they can deal with and who responds to them and helps them, that is a selling point. Like, we've seen it as the teams come on board, developing. Okay. Anybody else? I think we'll wrap there. Thank you.
Thank you.